the company rule expanded. Now let's have a look how the company expanded its rule throughout the Indian subcontinent. So earlier, as we saw, that the East India Company was only located in Bengal and some villages around it. Then how did it spread to other parts of the country and started to rule India as a sole power? So the key aspect of company's policy from 1757 to 1857 for the span of 100 years was, during this period of 100 years, the company rarely launched a direct attack on an unknown territory where it did not rule earlier. So one of the biggest thing was it never launched a direct act on any unknown territory. So they tried political, economic, diplomatic measures in order to annex the kingdom. They started to talk with kings so that they would surrender themselves, or economic benefits that were provided to rich rulers. Diplomatic measures were taken so that the kings and rulers would already surrender to them. So these three things are important to note here. Role of residents of the state. Now what role did the residents of that particular province or state play? Now residents were appointed after the Battle of Buxar in 1764. They were commercial or political agents to serve the interests of the company. Now you would ask, who are residents? Residents does not mean you or me living in a state or a country. No, it was not the same as it is now. Residents were commercial or political agents, people who were responsible to use commerce or trade or political things in order to serve the best interests of the company. So through them, through these residents, the company started to meddle, to interfere with the internal matters of the states, such as appointment of successors, administrative posts, officers, etc. Let's have a look at what the system of subsidiary alliance means. So what is a subsidiary alliance? So the East India Company, the Britishers, they started to demand and talk with different states for a subsidiary alliance. I hope you understand the meaning of alliance. Alliance is coming of two powers together. So the Britishers established themselves as the supreme power. So whichever state wanted to sign this treaty of subsidiary alliance, they had to accept the English as the supreme authority. So the East India Company believed as a guardian of the state. So the East India Company, they would become as a guardian of the state. Appointment of resident. The residents were appointed. The state kept on English resident in their court. So whatever court of order the king had, there was one person who was representing the East India Company. These were known as residents. They used to check on the activities and policies of that particular state. So keeping of an English army. Now these Indian rulers, they were not allowed to have their own army. They were supposed to have an English army only in order to protect the state from any kind of attack. So the state had to keep an English army so that they could prevent any kind of external or internal invasion. The state had to bear the financial burden of the army. So all the resources and expenditure on maintaining that army was done by the ruler himself. Now, giving to the territory. The next important point to note here is that territory, the land was given. So whenever, as soon as the Indian rulers, they failed to make payments or collect revenue and give that revenue, transfer that revenue to the East Indian Company, a part of their territory was taken away as penalty. So this is how the Britishers, they started to conquer land and settlements as well. For example, the Nawab of Awadh, he failed to make payments to the East India Company. So in return, he was forced to pay half of his territory to the company in 1801. Hyderabad was also forced to cede territories on similar grounds. So protection by the English. Now the next important point of this subsidiary alliance is protection by the English. So in return, kings, the rulers, the Nawabs, they were paying revenue and taxes to the East India Company. They were providing supreme power to the company and Britishers. In return, what were they getting? they were promised protection. What kind of protection? So in return for the above mentioned conditions, the English company, they promised to protect the state from enemies or any kind of invasion. They also promised the state to not to interfere in the internal affairs and administration as to the policy making by the Britishers. So they also promised that the company would not meddle or interfere in the policy decisions or administrative things of the state. However, this promise was seldom kept by the company. What power did the resident have? As we discussed, there were residents in the court of local state rulers. Now, what were the powers of this resident? Let's see. This is what James Mill, the famous economist and political philosopher from Scotland, wrote about the residents appointed by the company. So, we place a resident who really is king of the country. Whatever injunctions of non-interference he may say. So, as long as the prince act in perfect subservience and does what is agreed to the residents, that is to the British government, things go on quietly. They are managed without the resident appearing much in the administration of affairs. So, what we see here, that till the time the prince and the kings, they were doing what was asked them and what was expected by the British government, the resident did not came into force. But what about when they incomplied? So, but when anything of a different nature happens, the moment the prince takes a course which the British government does not favor or does not want, then comes the clashes and disturbances. So, here is a picture of Nawab Sujaruddillah of Awadh, who was forced to give half of his territory to the Britishers.